Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today I have a really cool production follow-up from Alaxander James watches. A little about these. These are hand assembled in Chicago, Illinois. And of course, Alaxander James started out doing Seiko mods and wanted to bring something of his own to the market. So he kind of has evolved over the years, and he's brought now this really awesome entry into the everyday watch space. Now, some key characteristics and design, which you're looking for something you can wear every day. Of course, you're going to want to find that versatile blend of both sporty and dressy attributes. This is his A3 Omen in the Aventurine dial. And after years of working with the NH series, Alaxander James has begun to use Miota 9 series. With this upgrade, they also decided to upgrade everything else, as well as with a more premium grade of case and bracelet finishing. Now, with each of these three different variations, they are limited to 100 units each. This is, of course, the Aventurine dial variation. These go for $650 direct. I previously did kind of a pre-production prototype preview, and now I'm excited to follow up with you guys with a production unit. So big shout out to the Alaxander James team for sending this review piece in to share with you all. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys. Now, before we jump in, quick thing I like to touch on, especially with younger brands. One, because they're less known, so you don't necessarily know what the packaging looks like. And then two, yeah, a lot of times young brands are constantly innovating and upgrading. So it's nice to check in and see their kind of current state of packaging. And I have to say, this one really impressed me. Check it out. Nice little watch pouch there. Actually spaces for two. And then, which I like. And for me, the really nice bonus here was these, right? So of course, if you're going to use anything like this, you're going to want to be able to pack this behind your watch so that the case back isn't scratched up by the clasp there, which is awesome. And this larger size works perfect for me. But if my wrist was smaller and I had to have more links out, then this wouldn't work. So I thought that was really cool that they also had this smaller variation as well. Although I won't need it, I like that they kind of already had that in play. And instead of just making a smaller one where there was going to be a little bit more slack or whatever, like they included both, where they could have easily just chosen to provide one. So I thought that was nice, and I thought that was worth kind of mentioning here, guys. Nice kind of suede, supple interior here, good amount of room, pouch for two, for growing collections. You even can see that there's a spot there for tools if you want to put them in there, a little slip eventually, which is cool. So that could be, you know, a spring bar tool spot, depending on the length of the one you have, or a little mini screwdriver, depending on the type of bracelet. But you can see there, nicely sealed. Great look. I think it's not some crazy super high grade leather, but it's nice to the touch. It doesn't feel really pleathery or plasticky. I think it's actually quite nice, especially considering the price point. Again, $650 for these at full price. And yeah, it's cool that that's included. But let's get to the good stuff here, guys. So like I mentioned, everything has been upgraded since the previous kind of pre-production run, and that's kind of the way that it should be, but it's nice to be able to confirm that by getting this production unit in hand. Now, it has a 38 millimeter diameter, is only 10.4 millimeters thick, and 46 millimeters lug to lug. So really nice proportions from that perspective. You're getting 316L stainless steel, brushed and polished, a flat sapphire crystal there. And then you're getting this nice sloped bezel, which I will say looks, it is a little large for a watch that is dedicated. I mean, like, I feel like the size of this bezel kind of makes me wonder if there's going to be a model that's going to use the same case with a turning bezel in the future, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Actually kind of reminds me of my Helios, which there's two, funny enough, there's two variations, one with a bezel, one without a bezel. And so it has that kind of duality to it, which is interesting. So I'm curious to see what they do later on. But I will say that having that thicker bezel does help shrink down the dial, which does help make the watch wear visually a little bit smaller, which I think, well, you know, today, right now, kind of smaller watches are trending. So that's nice for those of you with smaller wrists that might not want some, feel like you got a big dinner plate on your wrist. But ultimately at 38 millimeters, it's still going to be really nicely sized in general. Now, the crown is screw down and signed, as you guys can see. So nice feature there with a screw down crown, which is going to give you that nice confidence inspiring water resistance there, because you're going to know that your crown is engaged, which means the seals are engaged. Now, on the case back here, it is solid, nicely etched there. And although you cannot see it, let me get it to focus there. There you go. Although you can't see the movement inside, it's a Miyota 9039, which is great. Nice no-date movement, 42-hour power reserve, beats at 4 hertz or 28,800 vibrations per hour in terms of the beat rate. And it's actually been nicely regulated to plus or minus 10 seconds per day, which is great, right? It's not the tightest tolerance, but again, that is the absolute tolerance. It doesn't mean it's going to be plus or minus 10 seconds a day. It means that at its widest tolerance, right? So that means it's not going to be over that. Most likely it's going to be well underneath that. So much appreciated there. The dial is a nice glossy Aventurine dial. You have applied indices, the very common kind of 369 layout, giving you that everyday kind of adventure Rolex Explorer type of vibe. But instead of a big triangle, you have the split there, which kind of harkens back to some of, the Alexander James original kind of Seiko mod era, which I think is cool, right? So it does kind of pay homage to that history there. And I think it all lays out and is pretty well balanced in terms of that, the spacing and everything on the dial. I like that, of course, the Aventurine dial is going to be doing Aventurine things and having great shimmer and sparkle and light play and just feeling kind of like you're taking a nice look into a window into space, which I think is fun. You do have polished hands, which of course are currently reflecting off of a dark camera lens, so they're going to be a little bit harder to see, but luckily they're really well lumed, so you're going to be able to have that showing contrast. But out in the real world, of course, when you're going to be out and not filming in a dark studio, you're going to get the reflections reflecting off of everything, which is going to be a lot more legible, but maybe slightly less pleasing to the eye. Right here, it's making you see the polished surfaces as blacked out, which is nice for contrast, for really taking a close look at the watch. But again, in everyday wear, it's going to have a lot more kind of fill within the reflection. Now, it's using BGW9 Super Luminova, which means it's going to glow nicely in a blue tone, 10 atmospheres or 100 meters of water resistance, 20 millimeter lug width, which is very nice. And then you're going to have solid links and end links. It's fully articulated with this nice flat link bracelet, which tapers from 20 millimeters down to 16. Split pin construction. It would have been nice to get screws, but you know what? Split pins work. They're actually really easy. And it's not like they typically fail. It's more spring bar failures you have to worry about versus the pin construction. And the nice thing is you can't, cross thread or anything like that. There's also no collars to lose. I prefer pin and collars, but they can be much more finicky. And I'm just somebody that, of course, after years and years of owning and adjusting many bracelets for myself, I'm comfortable with them. But I will say, split pins are, just as easy as screw pins. If you don't have the right tools, especially when screw pins sometimes can be gunked up, especially in these kind of more attainable, small batch run kind of micro brand projects. So you do have a really nice 18.5 millimeter milled push button clasp with 6 positions of toolless micro adjust. You guys have seen this clasp elsewhere. It's nice. Even at full extension there, it doesn't break that. Let me give it a quick little wipe here. It doesn't break kind of the visual consistency there, which is nice. It doesn't look at like an extension from the top. Of course, from the side, you can see slightly that it does. But again, I don't mind this execution at all. I don't think they need to lengthen anything. I think that's nice. Give it a couple clicks back in, depending on how you fit it on your wrist there. But you can see quite nice, very easy to do. You do have to take the bracelet off for you to do that. That can be a plus for some and a minus for others. So I just giving a quick little wipe here so you guys can really enjoy that beveled edge and that very nice rushing there. And then, nicely signed with that crest, which I think looks also very nice. So with that said, let's actually get this on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this wears really well. I feel like 38 is a great size, even up to 38.5 for this style of watch. And yeah, I think it wears really, really well. I know some people are really into the 36 millimeter size. For me, I feel like in photos and stuff, 36 can look really good, but kind of out on a human arm and everything like that. For me, anyway, it feels a little bit small, so I appreciate the 38 millimeter size. Of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the lens here, it's just going to make the watch seem a lot larger than it actually is. So what I like to do is keep my wrist nice and low, and then just tighten up the frame so that you guys can get, still a detailed look, but just I think at a bit of a truer aspect ratio as to how this may lay on your own wrist. And all of a sudden, look at that. It's more nicely centered. You're seeing more of the overhang. You're seeing more of the sides of the bracelet. And I think, yeah, it looks a little bit smaller, which is how it's actually going to render when you look at it with your eye. So again, a little bit of perspective distortion that I try to take into account. And yeah, it's something, and it's one of the reasons why when you're taking a wristy for Instagram, why a lot of times your wrist just, why does this watch look so huge? And I feel like it's also one of the things that promotes people to wear much smaller watches, because they're going to be able to be photographed easier, because they're going to be able to kind of take the brunt of that distortion, because they're already kind of on the smaller side, whereas, more medium and full-size watches are going to look a bit oversized depending on the way that they're photographed. So you guys can see here, though, beautiful drape on that. Check that out. Very nice. Nice and flat, very thin. Great finishing there, guys. Nice and sharp to the eye, but not sharp to the touch. And yeah, the dial, I think it's kind of one of those things where it's a nice medium space where you can kind of like it or like it. I don't know if anyone's going to really be in love with it. I don't think anybody's going to hate it, which I think is nice. It's a little bit safe, yes, but I think the addition of that Aventurine dial is also something that is, I guess, somewhat safe. People really seem to like these days, but I think there's a reason for it. They look cool. They're pretty much going to render as a black dial most of the time, and then as you take a closer look there, you can get a little bit of play in terms of the lighting, which is very, very cool. So yeah, look at that thin profile. Very nice. Look at that. I'm impressed. So yeah, there's a lot of competition out there, kind of within this space right now, but we'll talk about that more. We'll get this off the wrist, set up for some Lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Hey, check out that Lume. Definitely much brighter than it needs to be, but within this kind of everyday, go anywhere, do anything kind of space, where you can dress it up, dress it down. It's nice that when it's dressed down that you can have really potent Lume like this. This is diver level Lume. And yeah, you actually even get a certain level of diver, water resistance thanks to, again, that screw down crown. And, still 100 meters, but again, typically diving, you're not going to be more than about 40 meters recreationally, so you'll be absolutely fine. But one thing I always like to work in is going to be a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. You can see, of course, a nice high level of contrast all the way around, whether it's during the day where it's going to be contrasting against that deep inky black, with the kind of, semi-white toned day Lume. And then when you get down to that blue toned, dark Lume there, it's very nice, very clear, very legible. You can see also the finishing, nice deep polishing there, and then nice consistent brushing across the flat links. Great bevel work there, whether it be on the bracelet link or on the case. So yeah, this definitely has a lot to offer. Maybe a little safe in terms of its design, but it's definitely, I think, fully loaded in terms of its spec sheet. And, a lot of people are spec sheet hunters these days, and I think that's something that, you have to kind of respect. It's one of those things. Some people really, I'm personally somebody who really is looking for more so the aesthetic and then the theme. Is it executing the theme? But I know some people are just going to want to find those bullet points and say, hey, if this has these, this, and that, then it means it's a good watch to them, right? For me, there's, a lot more nuance to deciding if I like something or not. But hey, there's less to complain about in the comments when the specs are nice and tight. So I guess that's going to work well, at least for me in this video. So, all right, guys, closing thoughts on the wrist. Really nice, of course, that the dialed in proportions I can appreciate. At 38 millimeters, it's going to have a physically small footprint, but visually, thanks to the smaller dial and larger bezel, it's also going to, wear nicely and maybe feel a little bit large thanks to how large the indices and the markers are, scale wise. It definitely gives you a nice visual punch there. But yeah, I think it's very versatile in terms of layout. Feels very sporty. Doesn't feel like a dress watch on a bracelet by any means. And I think that does have to do with the thicker bezel. Makes it feel more robust. And honestly, even though it's a 38 millimeter, I would say visually it appears larger. And I think that does have to do with the proportions, whether they be the indexing being more graphical and large, as well as that bezel taking up a nice amount of real estate. And generally, although you could make this, I think, appear a little bit smaller if you shrunk some elements down without shrinking down the case. I like actually the balance where they hit it, because I think it's going to be tidy enough for smaller wrists that might be, thinking 38 millimeters is a little large, but then also I think expansive enough for larger wrists where they might think 38 millimeters might feel a little too small. So for me, it does strike a bit of a sweet spot. In terms of model variants, definitely check their site links for current options and availability, as well as pricing, or you can click back to my old prototype preview, where I showcased all three different kind of dial variations. Of course, those are going to be a little bit more rough around the edges, being, pre-production prototype press previews. That's a tongue twister there. But as you can see in this, that this was actually, production-wise comes out really, really well. In terms of comparable models, guys, in the $650 price range, the competition among fellow micro brands is tougher than ever, really. But I do think that the A3 Omen does enough. It does do enough to earn a place within your consideration. It meets all the marks. It doesn't really have any of those objective shortcomings. Anything is really going to be subjective, right? In style and taste. So depending on what your preferences are, you might not prefer this watch, but I don't think there's anything in terms of spec wise that should have you, kind of limiting and holding you back from it. So I think that's great. So overall, guys, bottom line, I love to see brands evolve and grow. And, I like what Alexander James is doing here. The A3 Omen is raising the bar for the brand. This is like their best release yet. While many competitors, right, that are out there kind of playing within that under $1,000 price point, it can be kind of in that getting caught up and racing to the bottom, right? And I wouldn't say that they're direct competitors, but I mean, in terms of competition between enthusiasts, I think casual watch buyers, they're going to like what they like, but I think enthusiasts, you kind of do have to bring in that value proposition, because they're going to go digging and they're going to compare this to, other brands that are factory brands, quote unquote, right? Where the stuff is just out of a catalog essentially, and they're just putting a different stamp and a different brand on the dial, which is going to be much cheaper, especially when you're able to do that at scale, being a brand that works within a factory versus being an independent micro brand where you're owning and ordering and having to kind of mark things up, as they're going to cost you more and more as you produce. So, I like that Alexander James is staying, they're on the upswing, right? Some brands are trying to figure out just how to get to be the best $100 watch, the best $500 watch, versus I think here you can see that he was just trying to make the best watch that he could, and the costs are what the costs are. So I like that. I think it has a more organic feeling and vibe to it. It feels more personal. It feels much less like a financial exercise, which unfortunately a lot of the watch market today, especially within kind of that value bang per buck segment, can feel like it's an exercise in kind of value proposition versus an exercise in passion or design. So, hey, Alexander James, I like what you did here. So, yeah, they're still focused on constant improvements with each new iteration, further developing, his own signature design aesthetic, which I think still bleeds through here. It's not like he just completely rebranded and went a different direction. He took kind of, what he was great at and, invested more into it. Got nicer materials, nicer finishes, elevated specs, in terms of all of the elements that come together to create a watch. So with that said, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please like, and if you're already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.